Welcome to Side by Side, a podcast where I, Robert Kuang, take you inside conversations with artists, creatives, healers, and warriors taking the charge in their transformational story. Today's Side by Side guest is Phil Ginley, a filmmaker, programmer, and writer based in Brooklyn, New York. Having produced several short films, Phil is currently a programmer at the Microcinema Spectacle Theater, where they've moderated Q&As with filmmakers such as Dylan Mars Greenberg for her film Spirit Riser. They are currently promoting a posthumous retrospective for the films of experimental theater auteur Antero Alli. In this conversation, we dive inside Phil's formative experiences growing up around cinema and television, the value in supporting local and community-driven arts and culture projects, and the pros and cons of digital versus physical media. You can find more side-by-side episodes at sidebysidepodcast.podbean.com. And if you'd like to connect with me about my services, please visit www.robertquanhome.com. I am here today with my friend Phil, and we've known each other quite a while, but I've never been able to deep dive with you despite knowing that we have a lot of common interests, a lot of our passions are very similar. And I wanted to ask you about what growing up was like, because I know you're such a cinephile. I wonder if that was evident already.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my parents love bringing up one of the stories about how I learned how to read pretty quickly on. I think I learned how to say specific words as early as 2 or 3, and it's because I read the movie listings in the Newsday that they had. So I would say Universal or MGM. They were amazed that I knew all the names of the distributors by the time I was 3 years old, and other people as well. And so I grew up on the South Shore of Long Island, first in Freeport, then in Lynbrook, always kind of close to the city too. So I think that helped as well. Always having access to big theater and the hustle bustle of the big city, and going to the IMAX up in Lincoln Square with my dad. I think that all definitely shaped it. And I think just being a kid of the 90s, you grow up sometimes arrive at your house before your parents do. So you have time to watch TV for a couple hours before you have to do your homework and whatever. So you kind of build this sense of what you like and what you don't like, and how you can kind of discover other things through kind of understanding your own tastes, if that makes sense.
Do you have some early memories of cinema experiences, or just films you saw when you were young that just has stayed with you and made an impact?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of kids of the 90s, I did get started through Disney and what have you. I think The Lion King was the first time I was wowed by a movie. But I'd say as a coming of age adult, I think as far as also just the concept of movies teaching you something about the world and showing you extreme examples of ideologies that you find suspect or heinous. I think it was the 2006 Alfonso Cuarón film, Children of Men. I remember my parents took me to go see that, and because I think they both read the book. We all loved The Little Princess, which I think he also directed as well. That's it. My parents, they made sure to instill in me the understanding that the people behind that make these movies. That's not just brands and because even people talk about that with Marvel, but even in the indie film scene, I see people talk about A24 it's this holistic brand, and kind of only talk about A24 as independent movies, and it's a bit I don't know. It's weirdly hypocritical to me, or I wouldn't even say hypocritical, just weird.
No, I mean, I sort of understand, because there's a lot of lore behind cinema houses and distributors, and also just these companies that we've seen flashed across our screens all our lives. And even growing up, I know myself included, and so many other people were I wanted to work at Disney or wanted to work at Disney World and things like that. And that's partially because of all the movies they made that we got to enjoy as kids growing up and continue to, right? But it's got a, as I get older, I've definitely start to see the influence of cinema in more ways than just the impact of storytelling or like, let's say, technology. You're starting to see how much is deeply tied to other systems and how much it also ricochets back to impact
Hmm.
the industry of cinema, which I'm sure we'll get into. But you are connected with like more micro cinema
Yeah.
and like really truly independent communities and organizations. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what
Yes.
that's been like, and for people who don't know what it is, what those communities are like.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, I am a volunteer and programmer at Spectacle Theater, which is a micro cinema in Brooklyn, New York, right in the south side of Williamsburg, so right off the J and L for any locals who take the metro in the city. Yeah, we our billing is that we play and try to highlight lost and forgotten cinema. So that could be anything from a silent feature that was previously like thought that the print was destroyed and maybe has had a restoration that we can screen, to anything from a sleazy shot on video slasher film that someone in Philadelphia recorded on his like little like consumer grade camcorder. Like we try to broaden it. Like we play like a lot of weird, freaky stuff. Like I think I love whenever I invite my parents to a screening and they're always just like, yeah, that was interesting. Which is always kind of like yeah, it's a nice way of saying like I didn't like that or that was kind of crap. But like I think we look at indie films through the tunnel of like main festivals, right? Like so like Sundance, Cannes, the stuff that eventually gets picked up by like Fox Searchlight or as I mentioned before, A24. And like there a lot of those films are great, but they still have pretty big budgets. They still have a lot of like big name actors associated with them. And I think that it's important to cherish those films and praise those films. But I think it's important to also understand that like there are a lot of people who are making art that are just like you and me, that are just regular people that have day jobs that, you know, aren't going to get like an Oscar or get like big, you know, multi-million dollar revenue grossing from their productions, but they're
Right.
still worth seeing. Like they still have value to them. Like there's still some interesting aspects, especially if you go deeper into like stuff from like the 90s and the 80s, like where a lot of it was just like there was like one VHS printing of it and it was never re-released
Mm,
again. And like it's, you know, extremely grainy, but there's kind of like that like weird off, you know, like the kind of stuff that you would see on MTV in like the early 90s, like liquid television and stuff that like was really creative and interesting and bizarre and surreal and singular and doesn't really have a huge platform that it used to back when television was a bit more willing to be experimental.
yeah, it just sounds like these projects were made with care and also like made with the skills that people who study
Mhm.
cinema and film production have. But maybe they exist outside of a like a commercial context. And nevertheless, there are still possibilities for these projects to continue to exist and for people to benefit from these projects being made. But it's very interesting hearing about a world that exists outside of like the commercial financial aspects of film and television. And it reminds me of like the lady who
Mhm.
recorded all those like channel news segments and stuff for like decades and decades.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I was just listening to a podcast where they were talking about her, incidentally enough. I forgot her name, but I know there's a documentary about her and her work too. Yeah, no, for some, I for whatever reason, I've never checked out the page of her stuff on Archive, but I'm sure it's because there's so much like crazy, especially like if you go into locals, you think about like television as a medium. The stuff that was broadcasted in New York wasn't always the stuff that was broadcasted in like Santa Fe,
Right.
for
Yep.
example. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting to like sometimes when I visit friends upstate, I check out the like flea markets up there for VHS tapes for anything that was like re-recorded because I'm always curious what television was like back then in Rochester or Buffalo because you know I didn't grow up in Rochester or Buffalo, so but we can have that we have that access and technology now to like experience what media was like for other people that we like yeah, for like other people
Y-
in general.
Yeah, and also just experiencing, I guess, in this particular piece of history we're talking about, like local media, and really get a sense of like different regions of
Hmm.
the country, which I find really, really interesting. And it's become more monopolized in modern day. So
Yeah.
there's like aspects of cultural observations that have gotten lost, but with a random person's project of just recording their television, what's on their television, it's so fascinating they can have like a second life,
Hmm.
or what could have been like maybe a student project could become something more later on, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like in programming some of these things for the microcinema, and also just like in your previous like projects like this, what were some films that you were excited to share with people that is not very commonly seen?
Yeah, I could talk about one that's actually going on right now.
Awesome.
Shameless plug a little bit. It's part of my, yeah, it's my very first like official program with Spectacle. And like the main highlight of it is, so it's 4 films by this filmmaker, Antero Alli. He was born in Finland, spent most of his life in the West Coast of America, so like San Francisco and Portland mainly, and definitely like came of age during the whole like hippie countercultural movement of the 60s, and kind of carried that
Mm-hmm.
mindset through his like work. Whether he did theater, he worked on music with his co-partner, he wrote books, but what drew me to him especially was his movies. One day I was in a thrift store in Brooklyn called The Thing, with some friends, and I was checking some of the tapes there just to see if there's anything that caught my eye. And there was this one film with like this very blocky, like, you know how some like the VHS tapes have like very like big packaging.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was that. And it just like in like the on the side of it, it just said the drive time. And I was like, what is this? And so I looked at, like, I took it off the shelf and I looked at like the front and the back, and it's like, oh, this is like a cyberpunk film from like the 90s. I've never heard of this. This is, and it was like, it's a thrift store, so it's not like I'm like breaking the bank for this find. I don't remember how much it was, but it could have been more than like $5 or what have you. And then so I had it in my apartment for a while. I didn't watch it for, because I usually like, I don't like watch the stuff that I like grab at a store instantly. Like, so it takes me a while because I'm
Right,
already
right.
have like so many other things that I'm like looking to watch and look into. But eventually I did, because I have a USB to AV equipment that records like a VHS to digital, so I can like start digitizing my stuff. And I digitized this tape, and as I was looking at the footage without listening to it, I was like, oh, this looks really cool. I should probably watch this. And then I did, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, no, this is like, yeah, this is like a public access, like hippie reaction to the internet in a way that I have like not seen. And I need other people to see this too, because this is so cool and mind bending. And it's a movie that's free on YouTube for what it's worth. You can literally search the drive time Antero Ali on YouTube right now and watch it like this afternoon if you were ever so inclined. But I think having it in a theater in a dark room with a bunch of strangers, that really kind of adds to the experience of a lot of cult cinema. Like, it's one thing to watch Eraserhead by yourself in a room with your headphones on. I mean, it does definitely have its own merits. It definitely will frighten you, like it did me the first time I watched it. But it also benefits. Eraserhead also benefits watching it in a room with a bunch of strangers who are like, at the end of it, like, what the hell was that? And you get to talk to them about, like, yeah, that's how I felt too. But it gets a bit more understandable the more you watch it. And I think just like seeing the reaction of other people and talking to them about it and getting their own takes of it, like, that kind of like only adds to like the value of a movie, I feel like, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean there are some projects and films, like especially older films that maybe you've seen on like VHS and stuff. People have never gotten to experience it on the big screen, like
Mhm.
unless they just happen to have been there when it was released in cinema. Like when there are big screenings for like films that you've already seen. And I
Mhm.
tried to take advantage of that, especially when I lived in New York City.
I think especially like when the way we grew up, we watched a lot of stuff on not even just VHS, stuff that was on television or cable TV. And in that case, it was not just like shrink down to the size of a television, but it was also edited for time. It was edited for content. Like we watched a lot of TV movies on television. Half of the film was like mostly replaced by commercials, right?
Yeah.
So I think like obviously streaming has its own bad parts of it as well, but I think we take for granted like the good parts of streaming is that we do get like the full film in its completion, hopefully, unless like, the distributor is kind of a jerk and wants to change the content or what have you. But I remember even like people love to lambast or about like the Blockbuster days. Like, oh, like I spent like my lore started in Blockbuster, and like no shade to Blockbuster, but like they would drive a lot of mom and pops out of the mom and pop like rental stores out of like towns, which that is like objectively kind of a bad thing. But also when you rent like DVDs from like a rental place, 8 times out of 10, the DVD would be scratched. You have to take it out. You have to wipe it again. Hopefully, pray that would not stop it. That would stop it from skipping. It would still skip during like the most like essential scene.
Yeah.
So I think like when I watch, I mean, for what it's worth, there is also the dreaded P word, piracy. You could just download the files of the stuff yourself and watch it on your own. But I think with things like, Netflix and Hulu and what have you, like they have kind of created this ability where I could watch a movie completely uncut without any like true interruptions. And there is kind of a blessing to that, even with all of the, like, you don't truly own it. If it's taken off the service, you can't watch it anymore. There are clearly faults, but at the same time, if you watch it, like there are no technical, unless of course your Wi-Fi breaks, then I guess that's like the one Achilles heel. But, compared to the days of DVDs where if you left it like outside of its packaging for more than a day, it was screwed and you probably couldn't be able to watch it in full again.
Yeah. I think preserving objects like films as objects, is definitely a thing people have been on about because of like trying to digitize media for its benefits, but also because of the existing issues that already had, including piracy.
Yeah.
So it's like if it wasn't for the capitalism aspect of it that we all have to compete within, my personal feeling is that these can all coexist because they can benefit people in different ways. But sadly, there's a lot of jockeying, I guess. You know what I'm saying?
And you said the C word, capitalism is absolutely kind of like the dreaded driving force of a lot of this, especially like the desperation of like, oh, like we need to like buy physical media in order to like preserve films. I was like, I mean, yes, but also like if we need to consume in order to, like, that is just like at the end of the day still consumption. Like even if you're putting like this big kind of lofty mission behind it that like, oh, like I'm gonna like preserve Black Panther or like Everything Everywhere All at Once by like buying the overpriced 4K steelbook version of it.
Right.
I'm looking at my giant Blu-ray collection right now. Well, it's not even that giant. I have a lot of prized possessions, and I take advantage of the Criterion flash sale as much as everyone else. But I think it's important to like understand like how we can like protect and like preserve art without like relying on corporations. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think for a lot of filmmakers and like artists, that's where we started. Outside of I think for a lot of it is like outside of the commercial pursuits necessarily. We just wanted to be able to do what we do creatively and still support ourselves.
Which is tough to do. And I think like I like when I see movies that like reflect that reality. Like I think, I always talk about when me and Ari went to go see Blue Giant a couple years back, and I was just I wasn't bawling, but I was definitely like teary-eyed and like moved by that movie. Because another important thing about my childhood was that, and you as well, like I did NISMA. I did like the lessons for classical music training on the alto saxophone. Like I did all state auditions. Like, I played like Mozart and Bach and all that, like ad nauseum. I think that there is like value to and it's the whole like the way people say like, oh, like being seen in media, so to speak. Like that was a moment where I truly got it, where like seeing a movie that truly understood like the craftsmanship of performing music, particularly performing like jazz or classical with like
Yeah.
horn woodwinds. Like I
Yeah.
think, and on piano as well. Like I think it really like evoked like a feeling that like I never felt in a piece of media before.
Oh, you're bringing me back to that film, which I love, and I hope I can get it on physical media sometime. That's why I love cinema as like an empty canvas from which you can sort of put on narratives that resonate with people. And I would even go as far, it sounds hokey, but that, you know, storytelling in cinema has at times helped heal certain things that was
Yes.
like around music for myself, for example, right? And seeing
Mhm.
projects like that movie, you know, I was able to like investigate that and process that emotionally speaking.
Mhm.
And those things can make a tangible difference in people's lives when you're talking about impact.
Oh yeah.
So I just love the canvas aspect of filmmaking and storytelling for that reason, like you're
Mhm.
saying.
Yeah, and I think my favorite film that I've seen this year so far is an Indian film. I'm going to butcher probably the name of the town. It's called Superboys of Megaleon. I don't know if it's played up in Canada near y'all yet. It's incredible. It's based on a true story. It's about the town Megaleon, which is like a rural town in the middle of India, not really by near any cities, let alone Mumbai, but they still have like a deep love for cinema. There's still so many movie houses in this one just
Mm-hmm.
tiny town. And one of them plays
Mm-hmm.
more unconventional stuff as opposed to the typical Bollywood musicals referred to as masala in their language. They played instead like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin shorts. And a lot of these were like bootleg pirated versions, so they got in trouble by like the police.
Mm.
And as a result, they kind of had to make their own movies as out of
Hmm.
necessity and desperation. So it's kind of like a similar theme to Blue Giant of just kind of like people on the outskirts of like a society that want to make art regardless of like their current economic state or what have you. Like they need to create just out of like we need to get this out of us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
Yeah.
yeah, like I love seeing that. There is kind of like I could not watch movies and I could not be like into film as heavily as I am, and I could rather be into like sports or I don't know, like finance or what have you. But like I don't like I just need to be into movies. I like it's just a part of me that like is at my core, and it's like hard to describe.
Yeah, yeah. It just
Yeah.
calls to you, and it's not necessarily based on rational thought. It's a very much for me, like a visceral
Or like
experience. Yeah.
how much it will like benefit me, or like how much like I will personally get out of this. It's not because like I think like, oh, I'm gonna find like this one movie that's gonna make me like $1 million. You know, like I think you see that sometimes with like other nerd cultures or like geek
Hmm.
cultures. Like I mean, people say that with like flipping like comic books or like action figures or like merchandise from a
Trading
specific kind of
cards. Yep.
fandom. Yeah, trading cards. And people have even tried to do that with like VHS tapes, which I think is absurd. like,
Interesting.
to try, there was a Red Letter Media video about it a couple years back where like people have tried to like do like comic book grading, but with that like OG Back to the Future VHS tapes, which like
Yeah.
I feel like is just a way to make money out of like something that you found in your parents' closet. I don't know.
Yep. Yep. Like again, it's like digging up old antiques in some ways with some of these objects, which is very, very interesting. How has like cinema and film supported your understanding of like things like your own identity or other issues that you care about?
Thank you for bringing it back to that, because when I talked about like the first film that moved me, Children of Men, back in 2006, I think like so much of why I was moved by it was because it was just so brutally blunt about the far right's cruelty towards immigration laws at the time, and still are to this day. Let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
this is a film that was made. I mean, it was released in America, but I think it was like made, produced, and initially released in the UK, dealing with like their own immigration problems at the time. I think you know, this is 2006. This is around the time when like the Mexican border was being brought up as like this scary dog
Mm-hmm.
whistle, so to speak. And I
Yeah.
remember like being in the theater watching that movie, I mean, like, I don't know if you've seen Children of Men, but so much of it is just like one tracking shot through like the most like horrifically
Yeah.
upsetting like scenes of war,
Yeah.
like and dystopia you could like imagine. And like I just remember watching and just like, is this what they want? Like, I need, like, if, maybe if I showed this to Sean Hannity and been like, buddy, like, do you like this? And he'd be like, and this is like, you know, naive, like liberalism of like my teenage youth before I read a book. Like, I think there's definitely, I think that's what I like about some dystopian and cyberpunk fiction, where it really just like it dials up the absurd political moments that are at the time. I think another good like dystopian example is RoboCop from the 80s, which is also like about a very like right wing authoritative future. I was just rewatching the commercials because they play like fake commercials throughout that movie. God, it's so much fun. But that's another movie that I think is like Children of Men is a very like dark, gritty film, whereas RoboCop is a bit like more comedic and funny. And I think RoboCop especially like paints a vivid approximation of like how like dumb our current like state of like government affairs are. Like I think Paul Verhoeven especially, he's the director of that. He did Starship Troopers as well. Like that's a great job of like making fascism look silly and stupid, like still obviously evil and threatening and something to like fear and be against, but also like these are little babies, like these are annoying little babies that we need to fight against, but they're also little babies and it's kind of fun to make fun of it sometimes.
Random trivia about RoboCop. I distinctly have a memory of seeing that movie when I was still living in China.
Ooh.
So like I don't know about how censorship worked in China in the 90s because things have changed since then, but it was like a couple Western movies I have distinct memories of, like I saw this before I came here. RoboCop, Home Alone, and Mary Poppins. Just random trivia.
Do you know if it's a case where like they were harsher on like sex than they were on violence? Because I feel like that would make sense. Because RoboCop's a violent movie, but I don't think there's like any like sex or nudity in it.
Yeah, I think with like the policies, the way I interpret policies around this has to do with more like how they define indecency and public indecency at
Mm,
that. So there's like
okay.
it can go into specific categories, but it kind of gets all lumped together on like, is this depiction indecent or not? And they have their own
Okay.
interpretation of that. So it's very rarely be like a lot of things get couched under that umbrella, and it's kind of like a tactic, I guess is what I'll say. Yeah.
That's a fun thing to ask people about, like the different like censorship regulations during like the 80s and 90s for each country, because they were all so varied and different. Like I have a colleague who works at Spectacle. He's from the UK originally, and like they back in the 80s there
Mm.
was this like infamous term called video nasties, which they used to refer to like VHS films, like horror films that were like too gratuitous, too violent, too nasty, to be in like mainstream rental shops at the time. So like a lot, and you could look at the whole
Mm.
list of them. They have it all on Wikipedia, and I've seen, and most of these films are films that like you could, you know, they're like sequels to Halloween or Friday the 13th or whatever. They're not like super obscure underground like snuffy
Right, right.
films. But like they got this kind of like notorious like reputation in the UK of like, oh, like if you find these movies, who knows what will happen. And yeah, like that I think that's another thing that I love about like especially like horror films is like the weird like urban legends that we create around them, or even like the stuff that like, you know, people would say about like the Wizard of Oz that like was not true, like how like there was like a
Mm.
actor who like was in the background like hanging himself, or like insane stuff that like, you know, just teenagers make up when they're bored, like before the internet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially with like back in the day with like archiving is probably not quite the same as like the digital age that we're in now. So I'm sure
Mhm.
all kinds of interesting conspiracies came up, especially when you can, especially back in the day, you can sort of like cut and manipulate things yourself if you have the physical media. You know, another thing that I wanted to bring up real quickly before we wrap up is like, you know, I think the proliferation of seeing more art house independent films, as well as just seeing stuff like on YouTube and, you know, the DIY nature of like technology these days. I really think it's good for people to like have these skill sets around just knowing how to work with media. And like these days I see a lot of people who probably are in film school or like would have gone to film school back in the day like we did. They're doing stuff like scenic nature shots and films and like ambient like footage and like documentary style type of investigations, and they're just like posting it on their own accounts and stuff. And I feel like that is like an offshoot of that creative energy that I think a lot of people have, but like need a space to just like put something out there to have an outlet. And I think that is kind of like tied to the energy that makes microcinema and independent cinema so rich and like important for communities. If that, I don't know if you resonate with that.
Yeah. No, I absolutely do. Like, I mean, I grew up like going to the library multiple times a week, and I still do now, which like, this is a PSA, like for anyone listening, if you don't go to the library, go to the library.
Yep.
There's so much there, not just books, you know, DVDs, movies, like I found so many rare Spanish films that have to watch through that I found just at my library, like 5 minutes away. So you like, that's like, you never know what you'll find just by like going offline and going to a physical indoor place once in a while. But anyway, yeah, I do absolutely resonate with that. I think that, you know, especially like, I think a lot of people like think fondly about like growing up with like PBS and like public television. I think that like understanding that like the value in that was that it was small artists getting their like chance to be seen to a broader audience than they previously were. Like, think of like Mr. Rogers, like he was just like a guy who was talking on one, like was it Pennsylvania or like Ohio where he was from? I forgot. But like wherever he was, the point is that like he didn't start all as someone who was always on every like TV in front of kids in every town in America. Like, it had to start somewhere. And I think that the next time you come across something and you're like, well, I don't know what this is, instead of just kind of being like, you know, next, you know, because I get it. We do have like a very like convenience heavy culture right now. And it's kind of hard to like wean yourself off of that when it is so convenient. But I think that really like exploring like what you don't like, and then B, trying something that is different. This is more about like finding like if you come across something that catches your interest, but like it seems a little janky. Like I guess like a good example, like if you play video games and you're sick of, you know, the AAA, you know, oh, like they have a Call of Duty every year. Oh, Minecraft isn't what it used to be. Like, okay, so then maybe go to the Steam store, and instead of finding the newest Ubisoft game that's going to be $60, check out the new independent. Check out what is more inexpensive. Check out what's on sale. Check out, you know, and if you find something like kind of small that you like, then check out who developed it. Check out who made the game. Check out if they made anything else. Check out if they liked it. Like, I think there's so much resources out there for you to discover things beyond just what is in your instant, like, scrolling vertical feed. And I think the moment that we kind of break out of that infinite doom scroll and like discover other media that like has more like a more long-term fulfillment, I mean, I don't think it'll like save us, but it will at the very least kind of provide us a foundation of sanity that we can work on.
Foundation of sanity. What a dream.
Not to end it on a dark note, but
no, I mean, to your point though, I think during these particularly tumultuous, chaotic, and painful times, I think for lots of people, there is something to be said about, you know, if people flash back to 5 years ago, not too long ago, it's like things like cinema, checking in with your creativity, checking in with your soul and your basic humanity, basically. And to create these moments of like reading, fun and joy.
Like journaling.
Yeah. And it's like such a good antidote to a lot of the intensity that we're having to face mentally, emotionally, physically. So definitely second that, you know, checking in with your creativity, you know.
We definitely live in a climate that like wants our brains to act as fast and as quickly as humanly possible. To just like act now, react now, Like, talk about this thing now. And I think like it's important to like, we should probably maybe slow our brains down a little. If they're telling us that we need to like go faster and keep going faster and like go faster and faster over and over again, maybe we should try slowing down instead and see what happens.
Okay, Buddhist Phil. I'm like, I'm sure we could all benefit from breathing for sure right now. So,
Yes.
One step at a time, I suppose. But also, like, film is another great way to actually do less of the CA, as we say, because you can just find more common humanity.
One of my favorite things about seeing a movie in a theater is it encourages me to not look at my phone the entire time. And, we need those respites. And you gotta cherish those. Like, I think for some people I get like, oh, like I want to know who this actor is. Like, I want to know what time it is. Like, I'm like late on this payment. But like, I think like it's important to have those respites where like you are just not looking at your phone and you are in a completely other realm of existence.
It's like either a theater or like sensory deprivation tank, and one is cheaper.
I mean, sensory deprivation tanks are pretty cool.
With more proliferation of different types of cinema, hopefully, and, maybe just putting out there as more of a wish than an actual certainty. But hopefully the cinema going experience can improve a little bit as well, because we've lost some of that etiquette and I've had some very like difficult and terrible experiences. And that's another thing I think is like, maybe there can be a shift around that culturally through, again, more independent cinema and just varieties of community engagement.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to say about the upcoming like events and your programming, or just anything else you want to say about cinema in general?
No. So I'm programming my very first director anthology this month. It is called The Future Has Already Happened, 4 films by Antero Alli. It's a posthumous retrospective as well. He passed in 2023. We did Q&A with him back for his last film, Blue Fire, in October, and that was really incredible. But I have 2 other Q&As this month. The first is going to be today, Tuesday 18th at 7:30 p.m. We're playing Tracer, which is a sci-fi noir from 2022 by Antero Alli. And I'll be interviewing the actor Douglas Allen, who plays our titular Tracer. And then on the 31st, on Monday at 10 p.m., we'll be playing The Alchemy of Sulfur, which is a more intimate romantic film of his. And I'll be interviewing the same actor, Douglas Allen, who plays a dual role as a fictional tree studier. I don't know like the actual name for like the treeologist or what have you, but he plays that in the first role. And then the second role is he's an asexual interpretive dancer, which is also my favorite character in the entire film as well. We are also playing The Drive Time, which is the film that I mentioned earlier in this episode. It will be playing Friday 21st at 10 p.m. And this is at Spectacle Theater, 124 3rd Street in Brooklyn, New York. It's right off the L and J in Williamsburg. I highly suggest that, even if you don't come for these movies, I highly suggest you check us out anytime. We play anime some Saturdays. We play like surprise horror movies or kung fu on Sundays. We have a lot of fun stuff that plays throughout the year. Check out as I said before, check out your local library, check out your local venue, all ages venue, go to local shows, support local bands, call out creeps. Yeah, I don't know.
Creeps. I love as a call to action. Yeah. That was very Boston of you, even though I know you're not from Boston, but
like New York, Boston has, as much as we do kind of like talk trash about each other, we are kind of similar. It's the Northeastern dirtbag energy.
What a great way to end this conversation, but definitely check out your local, everything that's available in your local community. And if you're in New York, specifically Brooklyn, definitely check out some of these upcoming engagements. And again, just want to say thank you, Phil, for sitting through some technical what have you and making the best of it.
Of course, I'm good. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Robert. I appreciate it.